This is the face of someone that's just fought against Orc on the ladder using mirror image. So Neo's disappointed with the latest patch. He gives a conclusive review, and we're going to react to it because we know he loves when I react to his videos.
Hello everybody, I'm Neo. I'm a Warcraft 3 commentator for 17 years. The beginning of this week I was really pleased to see that our beloved game is getting another patch as
Feel like I'm
several
too big.
changes have been pushed to the test server. Now, after giving my initial feedback on the channel and talking to a lot of people in the chat, whether that's players or other people in the community, I have made up my mind if this patch is good or bad and what it is missing. It is patch 2.02 and maybe you need a little bit of backstory. Obviously, Warcraft Reforged needed a lot of work since its release.
Sorry.
Last year, we have gotten a patch 2.0 that brought a couple of new features, but the most important message for us was that there's a dedicated Warcraft RTS team. So this is the second patch of that Warcraft RTS
Actually, people working on Warcraft 3.
team, and we'll see if they're doing a good job.
Working? Or hardly
The
working.
last patch that this game got was 3 months ago. That was mostly a cleanup job from the big release that I mentioned on November 13, which was patch 2.0. We got stuff like skins and classic HD and all that kind of stuff. But that didn't include any balance changes. So while we got a content patch 3 to 4 months ago, the last balance change was 9 months ago. Keep that in mind. It's a very, very long time, even for our old game. This Warcraft 3 RTS team has promised that it will fix what's broken. And this is the step.
I mean, Neo said it before in one of his videos. We've all said it. It's you're going to go on camera and say that you're going to fix what's broken in regards to Warcraft 3 Reforged? Wow. You're really putting yourself out there on that one. Oh my goodness. There's quite a few expectations of you now.
Standard that we hold it to. Even with the big patch of 2.0, or maybe even because of the big patch 2.0, there's a lot of issues with this game, even though it is quite beautiful in itself. The problems are bad performance. There's two issues. One is AMD processors are really bad for the game. They just don't perform. You get FPS drops every couple of seconds. The second issue is that reforged graphics, the entire setting of the reforged graphics, are performing really, really poorly, even on new computers. And let's not talk about computers from 5 to 7 years.
If you've ever looked at those models, man, you know, like you just see it with the lighting, without the lighting. It adds so much over-the-top, grisly detail. It's like looking at a steak, but instead of just seeing a steak for like a cartoon steak, nice simplistic image, you're seeing every droplet of fat, every single excruciating like tiny piece of like everything, just all the grizzle of it is just included in Reforged. I don't know why they went that way. It's just like, what the heck happened to Brian Salsa? Seriously, man. Did he play too much Diablo or something? He just wanted to see pure viscera. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see every little detail. I want to see the pores. I want to see the pus coming out of the pores. I know that's gross. I'm sorry if you're eating or anything like that. It's just like, I can't help but wonder why they went down the road they did. I know it was done by Lemon Sky Studios and they've done a good job with previous projects, but is this not an example that the direction was incorrect then? If they got it wrong in this regard, that the direction of the art was not what we were expecting at all with Warcraft 3. When I saw the trailer for the first time, I was just like, that does not look like Warcraft 3. It does and it doesn't. It's not, that ain't right.
Ago. There's a lot of bugs and missing features in this. For example, as we see a lot of content creators currently grinding through the campaign, the save and load feature is pretty broken. Models just disappear. Some campaign missions are just completely crashing. And regarding the campaign, this campaign has gotten an overhaul to make it more playable. This has been scratched because there were a couple of bugs in it that have yet to be fixed. We're still playing an outdated version of the campaign.
Neo's talking about Cam's update, which was done a while ago, where he basically made it harder, or there was options, story, normal, hard, and hard would have bigger challenges. And generally speaking, the levels would make more sense. They'd be more dynamic. They just play better. So we don't actually have that. You can get that. There is a link to that. I can't remember what the link to it is off the top of my head. So if I can remember, I'll try to include it in the video description. But yeah, Cam has like a link to that where you can actually play that. You have to download it and go through it that way rather than just do it for the normal campaign. But I've played on the PTR. We did some test games. The performance is better. I'm not getting the frame rate spikes. My FPS isn't great, but I don't know. That's just because my computer's a little outdated. But then again, this computer still far surpasses Warcraft 3 in its standard form. But obviously, this is a reforged client, and it seems different now. If I went back and played like the pirated patch 1.26 or 1.27 and loaded that one up on its own separate client, I think that would still run smoother than my reforged does with the computer I currently have. So I don't know, there might still be something to do with AMD just not running generally well, but at least there's not the frame rate spikes. They did fix that from what I could tell. I didn't seem to have any issues with that. Save load feature, I tested that. I went on to the level 9 of the human campaign, where Arthas basically has to go collect Frostmourne, and I remember specifically a point where I saved it, I loaded it, I came back, the skeletons were invisible. This time they weren't invisible, so that's possibly an improvement because I can actually see them now and interact with them now and attack them now, because the only way you could hit them was through attack move. You couldn't do anything otherwise. And the campaign itself, I didn't have any issues. I did try loading, I didn't hear any sound issues, but I didn't properly test that in all fairness. The BattleNet functionality seems to be working. Not too much to discuss on that other than glitches that might occur, but I didn't have any glitch occur during the few games that we searched.
Another issue is BattleNet functionality. If you ever played on BattleNet, you know that some of your wins don't count, sometimes for days. There's only 5 servers, which is not enough, etc, etc, etc. Glaring issues. Plus, because the latest balance patch was 9 months ago, the multiplayer is getting a little stale, and there is more and more visible imbalances with the game that hopefully this patch is addressing.
I just want to mention the reforged graphics setting. That could include like the classic HD, which they said they changed the lighting to not be so bright. I honestly didn't notice it too much because I felt like it's still bright anyway, but I didn't do a side-by-side comparison. And Arthas is still black, so that's interesting. So they couldn't have properly fixed it, at least as much as you would expect. There's some sort of lighting shading issue going on there. Because if you look at Classic and then Classic HD, there's a distinct difference between the skin tones of Arthas. If you don't believe me, load it up, find out for yourself.
This is the patch notes when it comes to the non-balanced part. It says, fixed an issue that causes the game to hitch every 3 seconds for certain players. This is supposed to be the patch for the AMD processors. I have an Intel processor. I can't test this. I can't tell you if it's good or not. Then there's a couple of image screen fixes and lighting fixes, which, granted, was an issue after the 2.0 release. Unfortunately, no screenshots are provided that shows the previous lighting in comparison to now's lighting, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting point there from Neo. Wouldn't it be interesting if the devs themselves actually provided screenshot comparisons of the work that they did? Now, they've never really done this before in the past, so you could always fob that off as an excuse that they wouldn't do it. But it is very good to communicate, really, isn't it? When you get that feel of feedback from the developers, like, here's what we're doing. We've made these improvements. We listen to your feedback. These are the changes we made. And then we've seen it with like actual third-party developers and on Hive Workshop when they create projects or they update things, they'll actually give you examples of before and after and such. But we don't ever really get that from the professional multi-billion-dollar companies, which is...
So let's take a look. The AMD processors are allegedly being addressed. I will say in a bit why I think this is alleged. The reforged graphics settings perform as poorly as always. Bugs and missing features are not addressed. And for the multiplayer part, there's an attempted address. Is that enough? We'll go into this in a bit. The AMD issue is persistent for over a year, maybe even 2 years.
Webcam too big, isn't it, really?
Even pre-patch 2.0, this was an issue. And we've heard multiple times that this is now fixed. And on PTR, let's be honest, this was never really an issue. This was only an issue alongside mouse lag and other performance issues on live servers. So just because they say it's fixed and just because the people report it's fixed doesn't mean that this will be fixed on the live servers. I'm still very reserved on my judgment. I will tell you once the patch is live if this is functioning or not, and if the poor AMD users are finally safe.
That's the
Balance
biggest
change.
concern.
This is all.
Just quickly, is will these changes actually work when they go on live? And then even if they do, will the next patch then break the changes that were made beforehand? Because we've already had that. And then the frame rate spikes could be back. Who knows?
Obviously the big part of the patch. After 9 months, our game gets a fresh up. This is 84 changes. 48 changes, I'm sorry. 48 changes. And I have a couple of issues with that. If you analyze these 48 changes, 13 of these changes are coming directly from my caster colleague Remo Demo. 26 of these changes are coming from a community initiative by Don Dolare and Save Orcas. These guys are interviewing pro players and people in the scene over a month to come up with a consensus of what needs to be addressed, what needs to be buffed, what needs to be changed. This is a very conservative approach, as this is not meant to bring new features, new units, new spells into the game, but to address the status quo. 3 other suggestions or changes in this patch come from previous community feedback or unknown sources, but have been floating around in the community for a very long time. Since a couple of changes are overlapping, this results in 40 out of 47 changes are direct community suggestions, not only the direction of...
Nice try, Neo. Trying to shave it off and suggest that everyone's involved in this one. But we all know this is a Back2Warcraft patch. So if anything goes wrong, we know who to blame.
these changes, but the exact values. This means that the Blizzard Warcraft RTS team has come up with, to my knowledge, 7 changes. These changes are: the Orb of Darkness spawns level 2 skeletons instead of level 1 skeletons, even though a buff was suggested by Dondo and Save Orcas. Wards of Orcs are magic immune. Heal wards have their duration reduced by 5 seconds. Moonstone duration is increased by 50%. Orb of Venom does -1 damage. Mountain Giant Food is reduced by 1. And Wand of Negation charges are buffed from 2 to 4. As you can see, those are not really groundbreaking changes. This will not revolutionize the gameplay of Warcraft 3. This is very rudimentary, I would say, and goes into directions that the community has been pointed out before. For example, the unusability of wards, the strength of Orb of Venom, the unusability of Mountain Giants in the one-on-one matchup, and the lackluster performance of the Wand of Negation that was only recently introduced.
Fair enough.
Taking community feedback and taking community suggestions is not an issue. It's great because the people who came up with these suggestions are deeply involved with the community, unlike probably the Warcraft RTS team. What is an issue, though, that these people are giving full lists of what should be addressed.
I agree. The biggest issue right now is the skinks, as Ballador says. What happened to the skink? It got its movement speed reduced by 100. He can barely move now. He just suddenly became elderly overnight. It's not fair. Life is cruel.
A meme at the moment is, why would you reduce the mana burn range for the Demon Hunter? That is a suggestion by Remo Demo. And in itself, in the context of the proposed patches by Blizzard, it looks foolish to suggest such a thing. But do you know the context of that change? The context of this change is a massive buff to Night Elf expansions, a buff to the Keeper, a buff to the Podum, and other Night Elf buffs. Remo Demo says, if you do these changes and raise the level of Night Elves, then you can reduce the mana burn rate. All of a sudden, it doesn't look that foolish, does it? All of a sudden, it makes sense. Another thing, Remo wants Web on tier 1. And that, in the context of the Blizzard changes, doesn't make much sense. But his context is, I want to increase the tier 2 duration by 25 seconds. And then web should be available on tier 1. Makes more sense. The problem is that Blizzard is taking these changes out of the proposals of the community and throws them together into one potpourri.
You never know what you're going to
very
get.
Few ideas coming from them. Remo Demo has released his ideas 3 weeks ago. Dondo and Save Orcas have released their proposals 4 weeks ago. What did the Blizzard team do since the last balance patch? I don't know.
Well, I think it's probably safe to say, when did that, was it November? They did the patch 2.0. I think it was November, wasn't it? What was that, 4 months ago now? I would suspect a lot of their effort was trying to get that up and running and not being completely broken, even though it was still broken in many ways when it did come out. And they had the developer leak as well. That was funny. So I think their priorities are more along that line than the balance, because balance is always something that can be updated and fixed. But if they break the game when they're trying to create patch 2.0 even further than they already have done with Reforged, that's a bit of a PR nightmare. But a bad balance patch, that could be adapted and changed over time when they've got time. So giving them the benefit of the doubt, I would say that was really the real reason why there's not like a super consistency of balance patches. But overall, like Grubby was saying, it's every 6 months. I don't know if that's the case, but on average. But, you know, we still get patches for Warcraft 3 that do change the game balance. Bear in mind how long the game came out. So
7 changes in 9 months. I have an issue with it. I don't know what this team wants.
Very quick interruption here. A lot of the changes that have been in recent times for balance in terms of Warcraft 3 over the last couple of years at least, they've been quite wild changes, like steam tanks attacking ground units. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. That's the first one that came to my head. Basically wacky stuff. It's almost like they were just trying stuff to almost get people interested in playing the game again. Do you know what I mean? It's those kind of patches, rather than it just be like a +1 damage to this or a -1 damage to that. It's, here's a fucking steam tank and it can now hit units. Well, it didn't before. That's crazy, right? Wouldn't you like to try it out? And I think they've done a few changes like that. So I don't think they're like what Nia would probably hope is a team that's religiously watching the pro scene and adapting to what the pros think, what the average players think, trying to find a fine-tuned balance in between, not swaying too much this way, not swaying too much that way, just subtle changes that address the current meta. I think they just try shit and they see if it works, and it's something to put up there.
What this wants for the game.
Yeah, polymorph on heroes. Polymorph on heroes is another good example there from Holly. That's never been done before. Fuck it. Why not? Polymorph on heroes now.
What does it think should be addressed? What is the goal of this patch? What is the vision of the team for the game? Nobody knows. There's no explanations. There is no direction that this patch is going into. We can't assess a clear direction from this patch for the game.
Wanda says, Happy wants to make Acolytes invulnerable inside the mine. They're all like that. Happy's a strange example because he's like the best player in the world. He sort of knows what he's doing, just slightly. But when it comes to balance changes, he's like kind of far out in terms of his ideas on what would be properly balanced. It's very sort of disjointed in terms of true balance. A lot, like you say, invulnerability. Like you don't want too much invulnerability in the game because there's not much counterplay to that sort of stuff. And you said you've never seen that polymorph works on heroes ever since the patch. I've used it myself, but it's incredibly rare because you rarely ever get sorceresses, let alone get them upgraded just for the purposes of doing polymorph. Yeah, it can be done. It will be done. It's just not something you typically are going to have. So it's kind of a gimmick, really. it seems strong on paper, and in a way, if you was willing to have the potential to have 3 or 4 sorks and save up their mana to then crowd control an opponent hero just as they're about to throw a death coil to save their lich, or just as they're about to town portal, you polymorph them and then pick them off. Like, the potential's there, but the realisticness of it ever being done is so rare because you don't often get those moments where saving up a sorceress for 200 plus mana or whatever is ever really worth it in a fast-paced game where you need to go. So yeah,
In my opinion, there's a couple of issues with this game, even though it's in one of the greatest states this game has ever been. But this patch, for example, doesn't fix human power spikes or the incredible late game strength.
I do agree. There's been too many nerfs to human on this patch. Like the militia being nerfed down to 3, that's just bizarre. And then defend is actually made worse. It's cheaper, which is a good compromise. I can somewhat get behind it, but defend being worse now as a result, is that really good for the human players? That's definitely not good at all. And then they obviously nerfed the paladin rifles with the range on the siphon mana, which that one I can get behind because that's obnoxious. Anything that's like super obnoxious like that needs to be dealt with. But generally speaking, human do struggle, and I'm thinking that they do need a few more buffs. So Neo's definitely right on this one.
This patch doesn't address the glaring issue of pally rifle. This patch doesn't help the night elves.
It does. I think one of the pro gamers, the Asian ones, that sounds racist when I say it like that, but they had like their own thoughts and opinions on the patch, and some of them were saying like it doesn't address the paladin thing, but it literally does, because the siphon mana is the biggest problem of the paladin rifles. The rifles can be strong with their auto attacks when they get a couple of upgrades. Perhaps you could look into that, make the second upgrade not quite so powerful if that was really a massive issue with rifles. But the reason why rifles are strong in the first place is basically because of that blood mage being a super omega tank, and because of things like ring of protection being better than it's ever been before, it makes the blood mage much better at his job of just sitting in front of the enemy, forcing them to sort of like attack into him and then just steal their mana at the same time. So if you address him, you're going to deal with the paladin rifles. So that's not true, saying that it hasn't addressed the paladin rifles.
Serves them in a core mechanic, in a core player, the demon hunter. This patch doesn't target problematic undead matchups, and there's plenty. There is certain situations in human versus undead where one side is clearly stronger than the other, and vice versa. This goes in both directions. The undead versus orc matchup is very stale in a way that you can only play mass air, and that is not something everybody wants. We want the variety, and orc ground units would be nice to have in a counterable way. The undead night elf matchup is the clearest issue. But while the undeads get certain buffs that influence this matchup, the night elves get direct nerfs in this matchup, making a matchup that has been very, very one-sided. Happy hasn't lost in 9 months. Even more problematic. Now you could say, but Neo, they're addressing orc ground with the Tauren.
Yay.
They are addressing orc in a way that could break the game in 3 different stages for only one race, while not giving other evenly influential parts the same treatment. This patch doesn't provide cool new tools for the most races except orc, and it doesn't provide any new great interaction for most races except orc.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting change, is when there's items that actually are quite different, or something that's never been in the game before. Again, like kind of the stuff that they have done a little bit recently, some wacky stuff. I think those are always interesting, even if you don't like them from the balance perspective, as they do bring something interesting to do, or something interesting to build. I think there should always be something. I remember like Firewall being plus 10 damage. That was ridiculously good on like Pit Lord and stuff like that, but as a consequence, that got like nerfed into the ground just because of that one thing that made that hero really interesting to play again. And I wish there was more stuff around building up your hero. Like, in a MOBA, for example. You're just like, oh, I got this build, this spell damage build, or I got this full-on attack damage build, or this defensive build. There could be more items that could make you think, I want to make a Mountain King, so I can build these items or try to get these items that can make that Mountain King build work, for example, with Bash. I love stuff like that makes you want to try, especially neutral heroes. They need a bit more love. I think we need to see more variety rather than just Death Knight or Archmage or Blade Master at the moment, every bloody game.
Here's a quote from a community member that sums it up better than I could ever do. I mean, they didn't listen to players. They randomly selected changes from different documents and Reddit threads with a blindfold without any cohesive thoughts or purpose of their own. Splattered them into a badly written document without any explanation and left the community to not only point out the glaring issues, but basically creating an immense workload for the few that are able to give decent feedback, as fixing this list would entail not only removing certain stuff, but also adding a bunch of stuff.
Then why don't they have, I don't know, a group of creators, most likely Back2Warcraft, since they definitely watch the esports scene, the professional players and stuff, and see the game after game after game of what works and what doesn't. Why don't they just have a little communication with them before pushing any of these changes through, or at least adaptations? Then we can blame Back2Warcraft for real, but you know what I mean. It's like, rather than Blizzard just taking a wild guess at what they think the players want.
And that is exactly my feeling. I gave feedback on my Monday stream with people in calls that are not me, but players and community figures. I have a couple of issues with this, and I don't know where this is going. You can say, well, they were probably busy fixing the AMD issue, but that's a mechanic issue, right? That's a technical issue. Game?
What is that microphone, by the way? I'm looking at that microphone. I can't work it out. It looks like an optical illusion or something. It's like a sheet of metal that's been bent, but somehow it works really well.
Design-wise, I don't see anything in this patch. So maybe I had too big an expectation from a dedicated team in 9 months than just copy community feedback. I am disappointed with this patch. I know that these PTRs are an iterative process, and PTR 2 and 3 will probably come in the upcoming weeks. Until then, I remain disappointed, and I think this is not enough for this game that gets patches twice a year. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm an idiot for being hopeful for more. Tell me if I should give up on expectations.
Get him, chat.
Or tell me what you would expect from such a patch and what you are hoping for PTR 2 and 3. The game has enough issues to have fixes added in the upcoming weeks. I hope something's in the cupboard that will be presented to us over the next couple of weeks. Until then, we see each other soon.
Yeah, good video. Quite dour, unfortunately, but what we need, I suppose, is perhaps, ideally, there's a link to the video, is maybe a follow-up to have some suggestions of what Neo would like to see then. I mean, he did give some examples because it was referring to like Remo's full context. It's like, if you give web at tier 1, then tier 2 to tier 3 is longer and all this kind of stuff. There was a little bit of context there, but not overall on all the changes. It'd be nice to see if Neo went through, not necessarily every single change, but the ones that stood out to him, like Vampiric Potion or the Taurens having resistant skin and being like, here's why this is bad, or here's why resistant skin could be adapted to be not quite as strong as it currently is, but could be made so it's definitely good for Taurens to have, but not busted. That'd be nice to see. But cool. Check out the video as well. Check out Back2Warcraft. Did great videos. He's popping off as usual. He streams at twitch.tv/witty as well. So, yep. Thanks for watching.